Welcome to the Dr. Dad's podcast, where a naturopath and chiropractor come together each week to share lifestyle medicine, health advice, and inspiring interviews with some of the top experts in health and wellness, bringing you the latest in nutrition, exercise, ancient healing, toxins and detox, your microbiome, mindset, hormones, brain, and much more. Stay tuned. We're going to teach you how to experience growth daily.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Dr. Dads. I'm here with my main man, Dr. David Wardy. How are you?
I'm great, brother. How are you, man?
Great. So great. So much change going on in our lives. We were just talking about all the disruption in the world and how we pivot and change and become more adaptable and flexible with our mindset and our reality, right? We have to learn how to shift through things.
Well, it's interesting. This is constant, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like, the fall, as we slip into this time of year, there's a lot of adaptation being needed, I would say. You kind of see people moving through a little bit more uphill battles during the year, this time of year. And it's interesting to watch how it plays out and how we all feel and adjust to these changes. But yeah, man, it's super important that we have some awareness to where we're at. And then we have something in our tool bag to deal with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I think that you and I try to vibrate in our family is that state of steadiness, because I know, whenever we talked about change of seasons, there's a lot of flux going on, like transitioning in weather. Maybe it's more extreme for us here in Canada versus you, but I did see some snow in your backyard last year, so I know that it does get cold there.
It happens sometimes.
It happens sometimes. But so you and I were talking about just the importance of men's health and having a conversation around some of these topics. And I think just, as the Dr. Dad's podcast hopefully embodies, is that superhero, that superpower that we as men try to uphold and strengthen and be there for women. And that's that steadiness, that eye of the storm inside of the storm and the chaos of life that can happen. How do we as men really hold that container for our family and be that stability? And if we're not taking care of our health, man, we're causing disruption in our family and creating more chaos in a chaotic world.
Well, and more often than not, man, you kind of see, and I'm not going to say this is just men. I'm sure there's women that fall into this, but a lot of times it's kind of that awareness it comes kind of when it's either almost too late or when things are like really far gone already before a lot of us will wake up to like, okay, I need to take better care of myself because I want to be around for my kids, or I want to be around for my grandkids, or whatever it may be, right? But it's interesting how you see that story a lot play out of like, it's scary. Like we've talked about, like, for example, a heart attack. The first symptom of that could be a heart attack, right? Yeah. And you can die from heart disease. And the first symptom is a heart attack. But then it's like, oh, well, too late. You waited too long to address your health with these things. So I hate when I hear these stories play out, but it's also one of those things where I'm happy to be able to be there for people that want help. And that are like, hey, I need help. This is where I'm at. I don't want to be here anymore. Like, help guide me, show me the way. And like you're saying, as the male figures in our families, we're guiding, our families all the time. But to do that, we have to have our health. That's our number one asset.
Yeah. I mean, you brought up a really, painful and important point. And that is just, in our family, our extended family, and on Sonia's side anyways, there's been a few people young, like in their 40s, that have died of heart attack. And that we're 2 years past when this particular cousin, when I'm thinking of Sonia's cousin, that passed away. And I mean, it's mind-blowing because I guess when we're younger, we think someone in their 40s, well, they're kind of getting a little older. But now that we're here, we're like, man, I got a lot of juice left in this tank. And to think of an event like that happening for someone at this age is actually pretty hard to believe now. I mean, especially with the advancements in understanding with nutrition and even obviously in conventional medicine and early treatment and, investigation and, keeping an eye on your blood work and all those things can be good preventative strategies. And yet there's many that are out there that don't realize there's a little storm brewing inside their cardiovascular system. So that's definitely an important one. It hits home, I think, for so many people dying too quickly because they're not addressing these underlying reasons for why heart disease happens to be, in the first place. So David, could you list off, like, I think we looked on WebMD, what are the top 5 issues that men can face with their health?
So there are some variations, but we looked at a bunch of different sites, and basically the gist was number 1 is heart disease, 2 stroke, suicide is 3, prostate cancer 4, and then lung cancer or lung problems is number 5. So respiratory diseases. It's crazy, man, when you kind of look at that list. I mean, I think most males are aware now, and we have some awareness that prostate's a big one, right? So, I had a patient, practice member just a couple months ago, didn't show really anything crazy with his PSA, but he ended up going in. He wanted to run a biopsy because it was slightly elevated, but not too bad. And he ended up finding cancer like really early, right? So, it was something where unexpected for him. Like I said, it was just this random spike in his PSA, not high enough to have necessarily any concern. Some docs may not have even ordered a biopsy, but he's one of those guys that's very health forward and like doing labs and like getting ahead of the curve. And they did it and they found it, and he's going to get it treated now. And he was right away looks at me because I'm about to turn 40. I think he's in his mid 50s, and he's like, dude, get your PSA checked like every year. He's like, early detection, huge. And it's funny when he says that, you kind of sit there and you're like, oh, not me at first, right? But then you realize like, oh shit, like that could be me too. This guy's a really healthy guy. I mean, he takes really good care of himself. So very, very unexpected, but very important, right? Like there's a lesson there of we're not bulletproof. As healthy as you think you are, I mean, these things happen. And I think part of your responsibility when it comes to your health is just really being ahead sometimes of doing the right tests every year and making sure that you're just, looking at certain things and monitoring them to make sure that you're good.
Yeah. And to be honest, like there's sort of this male generalization that, we don't address something until it's broken. But I do feel like there's a change in that consciousness, because I mean, we see a fair amount of men in our practice, more so over the years, as compared to when we first started. So I know that there does seem to be this collective, increase in awareness around health and making it more of a priority. But it's stuff like that when we think of our families and wanting to be around there for for our grandkids and hopefully great grandkids as well. You really start thinking of the long game when it comes to our health, right? As opposed to, oh, I'm fine, that sort of hedonistic, approach to life. And, I think, I always think of the mindset, prepare for the worst, but expect the best. And so part of preparing for the worst is to know yourself. How do you know yourself more clearly? Well, you do your blood work. You have a mentor or coach or a doctor that you can work with to help you assess and read labs and understand what's going on with your physiology, so you can be a little bit more proactive and prepared. But you brought up an interesting point. I mean, we run PSAs a lot. We do a lot of hormone testing in our clinic, and I know a lot of doctors don't like PSA, and I can't say that it's the diagnostic tool. But I tell you what, it's rare. It's so rare that I've never seen anyone with a normal PSA have any sort of prostate issues. As far as like something out of nowhere sort of creeped up on somebody. It's always been these elevated PSAs in regards to prostate that have, it's either yes, there's a problem, or no, there's not a problem. Maybe it's just BPH, benign prostate hypertrophy, which isn't necessarily cancerous, right? It's more like the people may have symptoms of like difficulty with urination or some other signs of waking up too often at nighttime, but it's not the only marker, but it's definitely one that I think, it should be used in men. After the age of 40, there can be some signs that show up early. So that's a big one. And then since you brought up prostate, when we kind of break that one down a little bit, like what's actually happening there? Yeah. Do you want to start us off?
No, I'll let you go on that one, man.
Okay. So what are the typical things that could happen with the prostate? I mean, the biggest one is BPH. And so BPH, benign prostate hypertrophy, is basically a swelling of the prostate gland. And the prostate gland basically sits around the ureter, basically the channel that leads from the kidneys out to the head of the penis, which is basically where you urinate. And so when it's inflamed and aggravated, there's difficulty with flow. Maybe you're not fully voiding. Maybe there can be an uncomfortable pressure when sitting. And often it's people waking up in the middle of the night having to have multiple urination. Now, typically it's in the name. It's benign. It's not something that is going to absolutely end up as a cancerous lesion in the body. However, any chronic ongoing inflammatory event in the body can go through different stages of differentiation in the tissue. It can become more problematic, it can become more localized, and it can become more cancerous. I mean, that's just a progression of any illness, is going through different, tissue changes and stages of increasing inflammation. So it's an important point to address. So if this is going on, like what are some things that you would say that would be action steps for people to implement?
Well, for sure, if you're noticing, I mean, just for annual checkups, you talked about PSA, they do digital rectal exams, right? So those need to be done probably annually. And then if you're starting to notice like issues, let's say you've had these tests done, you're seeing, like Nick's saying, maybe it's affecting urination or you're having things like that. But there's a lot of supplements out there that help really well when people have issues with flow or they're going too often. I've had patients over the years that it's been a big problem. They're on certain medications, not working out really well for them. And then I put them on a supplement that targets the prostate and their flow gets a lot better and they don't urinate like every 10, 20 minutes and they see a big improvement. So you don't necessarily need to be on medication for something like this, but I think you need to support that gland that's under stress, or that that there's a potential issue there, whether it's benign or whatever, and just make sure you're supporting it. And it goes beyond just taking a supplement. I mean, there's a lot of other things that need to play into this, but I mean, if we're targeting that, we need to be gland specific and working on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so if you kind of like looked at the physiological mechanism, like why is there inflammation in the prostate? So some things that we counsel our clinic members on is, one is we want to know your underlying story. Like, what are some factors that have led to chronic inflammation? When we think of depositing toxins in different glands and organs and tissues of the body, that would be one of the first places we'd look. We'd want to see someone's heavy metal toxicity. Often there's lingering microbes and things like that are, whether it be yeast or parasites or viral things or bacteria that are building up in the body, and often there's a correlation between these microbes and expressing illness in certain parts of the body. And so doing some version of investigation is absolutely important. Another common ratio that we see out of balance is the testosterone estrogen ratios. It's always been thought that testosterone is driving prostate disease. And so a lot of the treatments around helping to control BPH or prostate cancer is to actually eliminate testosterone from the body. And these poor individuals feel, emasculated because the hormones are so depleted. They're emotionally not themselves. They lose a lot of their, obviously, libido and vitality and all those things that make us feel more masculine. Those things are stripped away in this sort of understanding that testosterone drives prostate cancer. The crazy thing is there's really no studies to actually support that or prove that. But yes, testosterone essentially converts into something called dihydrotestosterone, which is your more potent form of testosterone. But there's two different forms of this dihydrotestosterone. There's alpha and beta. And so it's the alpha version of this that tends to be more problematic from an inflammatory event versus the beta. And a lot of the supplements that David was referring to are targeting this increased conversion into its beta form. And so there's tests like Dutch tests that show the breakdown and metabolites of testosterone, shows your ratio of estrogen to testosterone. Because what we're finding is that when we've got this buildup of alpha DHT, and this overwhelm of these toxic estrogens, that can be definitely a hormonal recipe for disaster when it comes to the prostate gland. And so, maybe you have success with a prostate formula like a nutraceutical, and maybe you don't. But if you don't know what your hormones are doing, if you don't know what toxicity is lying in the body, if you don't know what underlying microbial imbalances or infections could be going on, even inside the tissue itself of the prostate gland, we're kind of just managing symptoms, right? And that's that's a message for any illness in the body, but I think it's a really important one for a lot of men to look at. And on the note of microbes, just one last point here is that we do see a lot of men that have prostate issues that also have this concomitant ongoing fungal imbalance in the body. So no doubt there's a role that each of these, events are playing in the body.
Well, I'm glad you talked about like the upstream stuff, right? Because you gotta kind of work your way, like Nick's saying. I mean, we know we have a problem, but it started from somewhere. It came from something else. And if you're not going upstream and, like Nick's saying, looking for these other things, you're really not really addressing it, like you're saying. And I'm glad you said that, because I mean, yeah, you can take these supports like I was talking, but there's a lot of other things that are going to play into the overall reason why you're struggling and having that problem. And so, yeah, those are some good things, man, that you mentioned.
Now, I know you have a really unique way of looking for obstacles. And I know you've talked about it on previous podcasts, but you can't talk about, the energetic aspect of the body, that's synonymous with healing. And so, like, what are some other things that you uniquely would look at when someone has, say, blockages or inflammation in specific tissues?
Well, it's interesting. This is something that one of my mentors who taught me a lot of this work, he says, the brain always knows the reason, right? I mean, he was saying something the other day. There's a saying where he says, structure affects function. Mm-hmm. And you've heard that saying, right?
100%, yeah.
But when you really think about that, it's absolutely incorrect. Function affects structure. Because how is the structure of the body maintained? How do we have integrity? How do we have all these things work? It's through a fully functioning nervous system. So, the conversation that he was getting into and the point he was making, he was talking about evidence-based care and about how the fact that even when they use that word and they're using all these different diagnostic tools to figure out what's going on, they're not even far enough upstream to find the why yet. They still haven't found the why this is being a problem. They're really addressing something downstream and just really managing the problem most of the time. I hope you're following me with
yeah. Can you give some examples of function determining structure? Because I think that's a really important shift of awareness when we're talking about these topics.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, because if any docs are listening to this, you've heard that saying. I heard that saying when I was in school. Structure affects function. But I was talking about this this past week when I talked about coherence and the subsystems that give us structural integrity, right? So you have your nervous system, you have the fascia, you have the active system, which is the muscles and tendons. You have mental emotions, right? Our mental emotional health. You have the neural component, which is the spinal cord. These are all neurologic. These are all communication based. So if these aren't sending the right information downstream energetically, if you're not moving energy properly because you don't have coherence of the master system that brings all these things together, then your structure will not have any integrity, or there's going to be kinks in your armor, right? And the structure is affected. So structure doesn't affect function. It's the other way around. Because when you really think about that saying, it's completely the other way around, because energy is what influences everything. So you look back at just something as simple as acupuncture. I mean, this is an ancient medicine. It's been around forever. Well, what is it rooted in? Well, it's rooted in this idea that when energy cannot move properly through the body, it creates disease. It creates abnormal functioning, right? It creates a lack of, right?
Yeah.
So you can't really say that structure affects function, because it all comes down to energy, and if that energy is moving or not, period.
As you're speaking, I couldn't help but think of Mantak Chia. He's a Qigong master. Everything that he teaches about cultivating this this energetic flow in the body. And, you mentioned, acupuncture, it could be Ayurvedic medicine. So many of these systems of our past aren't so microscopic in their thinking that this molecule does this in the body, or this cell does this in the body. It's really looking at, a systems approach of looking at how all of these things are coordinating together. And a lot of Mantak Chia's teachings are like how to develop the capacity to move energy in your body and increase flow. And, when you think of the quintessential sort of man with prostate cancer, what is he typically, this isn't always the case. Obviously, it's a generalization, but there's probably some level of insulin resistance going on. There's probably some diminished activity, level. There's, maybe some unhealed emotional trauma, some, maybe there's some unhealed sexual trauma, even,
there's toxicity for sure.
Toxicity. Yeah. There's maybe history of smoking or like addiction. There's often these unhealed parts of us. And like when we break all that, like those things away, really it's stagnant energy. It's energy not flowing through the body as a result of all of these things together. And I know, like, there's this consciousness within men, I think, even as we grew up, to not really have healed our sexuality. I think there's been this sort of idea of being more of the dominant figure, maybe in a relationship, or like I can have this because I'm a man, or this kind of thing, where there is sort of an abuse of power. I think that's happened, and even energetically speaking, that's also there. So those unhealed versions of our little younger selves not expressing, in a coherent kind of way, to bring up some of your language from the last one of the previous podcasts. But that's an important piece, and it hits, on that emotional level, that energetic, neurological level, that spiritual level of a deeper connection to something greater, and some forgiveness for ourselves for maybe our behavior in the past of really not, addressing these things that were absolutely toxic in our emotional, our emotional expression of who we are. And that lingers as trauma for, an impact of how we treated other people, how we treated ourselves, and so on and so forth. So you brought up some really important points.
Well, I love that you brought it to this spiritual piece, because some of these impacts and these experiences that we have in life that we don't recover from, these are affecting the soul of who we are. And that's the energy of who you are. And the more, traumas we have and things in our life that we can't move through, that we carry with us through life, is what is affecting and stagnating this energy, like we talk. I was just telling you before we got on, I read a thing on Rob Morgan's website where he talks about, many of the things that we feel that we are aware of as far as physical ailments or whatever is happening with us. It's kind of like, he says it's the flower of the weed in your bouquet of flowers. You have a bouquet of flowers and there's weeds in this bouquet, but you're only really aware of where this weed is blooming, where the flowers off the weed are. But the root is something completely different, but the root is connected into the soul. And that's kind of what we're speaking to. And I'm moving into this whole, like, if you're really getting upstream to the real cause of a lot of these problems, we're not usually aware of what that is.
Yeah.
So like someone with a prostate problem, this could be something from, like, maybe he was molested when he was a kid and he carried that with him his whole life and he never healed from that trauma. And that over time has created, like your things, it's added to the toxicity in the system and all these other things because the system couldn't run itself properly. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of our listeners are listening, they're like, whatever, but you have to understand.
Maybe not. I think our listeners.
Some, but there's got to be a couple that are going to hear this and be like, this guy's so full of shit. But the reality is, really think about this, everybody. We're trying to take you upstream to like the very tip of the root of explaining, like, your thinking has to go to the root versus what you think you're aware of or what you're experiencing. It's beyond the physical. We can get into all these conversations of quantum physics, and we've had some of those with energy and stuff. But the reality is, like, the reason I love all this ancient medicine, and the reason it's been around so long, is because they took what we're talking about and they took it to the root and said, this is why we get sick. So this is what you address. And it's not to say you don't address these other things, right? You still have to do all these other things, but you're not going to get where you need to get in your healing sometimes unless you get that far upstream. I mean, brother, I went on a retreat with you like 3 years ago, and what are we doing all week? We're working on the soul. Mm-hmm. And you come out of these things different people because you work on things that are literally rooted in the soul, and it affects how you feel and how energy moves and how you live your life. So it's no different whether it's like what I'm talking about, or you're going to a retreat to do this, or whatever you're doing. But it's almost like there's a need for more soul healing in this day and age. And I would say that to a lot of the men that are listening to that, and get out of this whole machismo mindset of like, like Nick was saying, I only go to the doctor when shit's breaking, or you're going to do maybe some prevention and get labs, but it's got to go beyond that. Like, where are you at in your life with your overall healing of how you've made it through life and things that you need to maybe address that you've carried with you? Because that's where the juice is, that's where the healing's in it, that's where you're going to get it. But you got to be willing to walk through that door and really approach those things head on and be okay with that.
Love it, man. I mean, when you think of like, if we took that sort of energetic lens and put it on top of those core conditions, there's 5, right? So heart disease, suicide, stroke, prostate cancer, and then lung cancer.
I mean, what, 4 of those? Yeah, it's exactly what we're talking about. Like, the root of this shit is just stress. And if you haven't dealt with your shit, you're probably going to develop heart disease, because that's like chronic stress in your system, right? I mean, I don't know where you were going with that, but I'm laughing as you're saying that because it's so true. Like, these are all like really just long-term chronic stress conditions. Many of these can be avoidable if you're living the type of life that we're talking about and you're healing the body where it needs the healing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it's just an interesting correlation. If you look at the energetics of the heart, yes, there can still be toxicity. Yes, there can be like poor diets, there could be a history of smoking and all that stuff. That's all, like as you mentioned before, that's like the flowers on the weeds. Like, those are definitely challenges that your body needs to overcome. There's no doubt about that. However, the stuff that we're speaking to, the heart, that's that center of like, true joy and true happiness, true fulfillment, sits in the heart. A stroke can be anywhere in the body, but let's say it's in the brain. That's your connection to something greater. The lungs are a place of unhealed trauma and grief, right? Where we haven't really processed that emotion of grieving, of loss, of maybe even disconnection from, yourself as a young one. We talked about the prostate energetically. That's your root connection. That's your connection to Mother Earth, the divine feminine, an unhealed masculine aspect, or a lack of feeling connection to tribe and true connection to a community. That's all that prostate stuff. So, and then suicide. I mean, that's just a massive misrepresentation of, I'm not going to simplify this. Obviously, there's so many different, reasons for why it's happening, but essentially it's not recognizing that greater you, that capacity for who you really are. And, at the end of the day, all of these things are sort of unplugging ourselves from that flow of energy, that flow of vitality, and that flow of what makes us realize that there's so much more to this life than, this physical substance that we're, moving through. I don't know why on the drive in this morning, I just felt like it was really important to talk at some point today, just around this body. This physical body is like a vehicle, and we really are maintaining it so that we can drive a really amazing car for as long as we can. But it's what gives that engine in that car life. That's the soul. That's the spark of who you really are. And so, that this physical vehicle that definitely is mortal, and it has a timeline to it, can definitely be optimized and upgraded and whatnot, but that piece, that essence of who we really are and what makes us click and connect to others, and that would maybe drive us down a path that's going to lead to a pretty challenging outcome or negative outcome, whatever you want to call it. That's up to us and our ability to connect to that piece. So yeah, I mean, it's funny because when you and I started this conversation, we were kind of like, well, let's talk about some of the men's health stuff. Let's talk
Right.
about some of the things that many men might be facing, and like how to be more vital and strong in that family unit. So, your wife doesn't have to worry about you, your kids don't have to worry about you. But really, like, this is the crux of the matter is, like, are we willing to do the work to get into, divine connection with who we actually are? Like, are we willing to do the work to know ourselves more deeply? And if so, like, that willingness really opens some amazing doors for us.
Well, it's kind of like that's the root, right? And when you have that and you're working on that and we're doing good on that, it's easier to address these other things because these things are just part of the picture. But it's funny, like you said, we drift that way, I think, because I think you and me have this understanding of, like, that's where the healing has to take place, really, to make sure that any of these top 5 elements don't become you as you're going through life. I'm even looking, as we're talking, liver disease is another one, right?
Yeah.
And alcohol. I mean, how many guys drink to deal with stress?
Or to feel connection.
Yeah, or that. I mean, that's their poison. That's the poison they pick to, like, find that connection in life or deal with stress. And, like, there's so many better things you can do, right, than drink alcohol to find that.
I tell you what, man, like, that was the easiest way to connect with friends when I was younger. And I know, we see a lot of clinic members that are still doing that behavior well into their 40s and beyond. It's where we can have an excuse to hang out with other dudes and just to feel like you're connected. It's like that alcohol becomes a gateway to find connection. And so, it works until it doesn't, as our dear friend Tommy says.
Yeah.
I'm sure others have said that too, but the point being is that what are you actually looking for? What do you actually want? And is your friend circle actually serving you? Like, or is there people in your life that you need to spend more time with to allow for that connection to happen, to allow for that deepening of yourself, or that inquiry, investigation into who you really are? And that's an opportunity for all of us, right? Not just men.
Well, I think that's a tough pill to swallow for some guys, right? Because they're probably thinking, like, oh shit, that's the only time I do find connection is when I go out and drink with my buddies or whatever. But like, if you're finding that that's you and you don't have those times in your life where you don't need alcohol to do that, I think it's time for some change, right?
Absolutely, brother. Well, my man, we hit on some, I think, really important points today. There's obviously more of this dialogue that keeps unfolding as time goes on. Any home play that you want to recommend for people to do after this one?
I challenge, let's just keep it simple for you guys. If you don't get an annual exam, if you're not getting an annual, blood panel looking at your overall health, if you're 40, I would tell you, like, you need to be getting a prostate exam. You need to be getting a PSA done. Like, some of these tests are just essential. It's not really one of these things where you say, oh, I'll just do it every once in a while if I feel something. Like we said earlier, like, your first symptom could be a heart attack and it's too late. So make it a goal for yourself once a year to have a big examination and look at a large part of aspects of your health, and then maybe change it up with the types of labs that you run over the year just to look at different aspects. But if you have this thinking forward and getting ahead of the curve type mentality, it could save your life. And I think that's the big thing that we just need to hit home is early detection. And just staying ahead of these things can, number one, make you feel better because you address problems in real time if you already start to have them. But you could also catch something pretty big and save your life one day.
It's an amazing action step. And we do that too. I've just recently ran a big full NutriVal micronutrient panel, and it found out some stuff, some blind spots that I had that I'm actively correcting as well. So we're not perfect. We're right there with all of you, gents and ladies and everything in between. We're there looking at our own stuff as well. So I think it's an important message. Love it, brother. So we got some awesome guests coming up over the next few weeks, and we'll call out again. Thank you so much for all of you guys who tune in and share the episodes and comment. It really helps us grow our channel and get these messages out to more people. So keep doing the good work that you're doing. And David, till next time.
On the next one, brother. Love you, man.
Love you too.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please be sure to subscribe to the Dr. Dads and share with your family and friends. You can also follow and interact with Dr. Nick and Dr. David on Facebook and Instagram for a daily dose of inspiration and the latest in health and wellness. Be well.